These are scenes of liberation. Allied prisoners of war becoming free men.
I was getting overcome with relief, if you like. It seemed almost a dream that we were loose.
Free from Nazi captivity after being held behind wire, some for almost 5 years. For the starving prisoners, freedom was almost unbelievable.
I couldn't explain the exhilaration or the joy of being free. It's something that actually numbs you. There was going to be no more guards, no more pushing around.
As the eastern frontiers of Nazi Germany collapsed, over 250,000 Allied prisoners of war were force-marched from their prison camps into the savage landscape of a bitter winter. Many never made it. They struggled for almost 1,000 miles through a brutal climate amid chaos, genocide, and starvation.
It was only willpower that makes you go, and that's all you can say.
Returns to London as the drama of power politics reaches its climax in August. Hitler and Stalin sign their pact. Nazi threats rise to a scream. Peace hangs in the balance.
In early 1939, men around Britain volunteered into the forces, fearing that war in Europe was likely. But many joined just to get a job or escape the tedium of normal working life.
Well, what made me join the army in the first place was the fact my father was in the Royal Military College Band, and the only place you could get employment round here was to be an ex-serviceman to get into the college.
My dad was a carpenter, and I followed in his footsteps. I volunteered when I was 17, but they didn't call me till I was 18.
I come from the Welsh Valleys, town called Abertillery, and I was in a coal mining family. I was 14 on a Friday, and I was down in mines on the Monday. And I thought, I don't know, I'm missing all the action here, staying in a coal mine. My friends was coming home in uniform and all that, and I thought I'd better do something about it.
On the notice board, which was joining the territorials, it was for home defence. And if you joined, you had to do 40 hours a year, and you had to go on camp for a fortnight holiday. Well, it was one of the things we thought, well, we only get a week holiday, so boss will have to give us another week.
I volunteered because I thought I was going to get into a regiment or company that didn't fight. Less chance of getting killed. Nobody told us about getting be taken prisoner.
In mid-1939, as tension in Europe increased, the government introduced the Military Training Act, drafting single men aged 20 to 22 years into the military.
And one morning in June 1939, I go to work, and there's a chap standing there with a local morning paper. Across the front page, in big letters, is the word conscription. And he said to me, "Bob, that affects me." I says, "What do you mean it affects me?" He says, "You've got to join the army." I said, "Nip off, I'm not joining the army." Oh, he says, "It's law, you've got to."
On September the 3rd, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany. The National Service Act was announced, and all men between 18 and 41 were eligible for conscription into the armed forces.
In Parliament, after years of waiting for other nations to disarm, Britain bows to the inevitable. Youth is called to serve. Britain has given the world a mighty civilization. Shall it now pass away through outside domination? New call to defend our freedom goes out to the men of Britain and the Empire, and they answer, "We come to serve."
When war broke out, I knew that I was due for an early call-up. and we thought that the war would be trench warfare, and I didn't want that, so I thought to try and get in something other than the infantry.
In my case, I thought that sooner or later I'm going to be called up. I was at that sort of age. I'll choose what I want to go by volunteering now, rather than being called up. And I was lucky to some extent that I did what I wanted to do.
I wanted to join the Air Force, but I couldn't because being a reserved occupation, the only way you could get into the Air Force was to volunteer for aircrew, which I did.
I said I wanted to join the Air Force. I volunteered. I went for the medical. That was fine. Then you had a maths and an English test. And they said, you're accepted. Now we want you to be an observer because your maths are good. So I said yes and took the King's shilling.
Each man who joined, either voluntarily or conscripted, received basic training. Many found it to be inadequate.
The training was very poor indeed. For argument's sake, I'll tell you, there was a ring of us sitting on the ground on a piece of carpet with a brain gun in the middle. A sergeant took it to pieces, then handed it round to us one at a time and told us to put it back together again. That was our training on the brain gun.
It was pretty hard, and you had to learn to carry this machine gun and a tripod, and you had about 8 people in the squad that carried ammunition, water cans and different things that they had we needed. It was pretty hard going, and you had to, this blooming gun on your back used to cripple you, you know, and the tripod was even heavier.
Had a bit of manoeuvres, map reading, fired some rifle shots.
Our training included going into bomb pits in Worley Woods and throwing hand grenades and making sure you didn't drop it on the floor to everybody's chagrin. Bayonet training, of course. Physical training, PT, which I hated.
After doing some initial flying on Wellingtons on 12 Squadron, I was transferred to 103 Squadron on the Halifax aircraft and did the rest of my flying training there.
To give a 20-year-old a 4-engine bomber and say, fly this, it was like giving a kid a Ferrari, really.
I only fired a rifle once, and that was on Salisbury Plain. 5 rounds of ammunition, and that was the lot.
20 rounds. That was it. And when we came to it, my target had got more shots than I'd fired. The chap the next chap to me had been firing into my target.
Hurried and insufficient training would leave many of the recruits ignorant of the realities of actual warfare.
Being at that age, you don't think about getting killed. You're not going to get killed. It only happens to other people. It never happens to you, you know.
I never dreamed that it was going to be anything serious, actually. I knew nothing about Germany or how strong Germany was.
Faced with the imminent threat of attack by powerful German forces in Europe, Britain mobilized for war.
We just had a hard time training and route marching in the mucky slush. And that all came to an end, of course, when you were told one day, 3 days leave, which everybody guessed then was for foreign service, and it was true, we went to France.
We were given all this Middle East gear, you know, the hats and the shorts, and off to Liverpool.
The sergeant major rapped on the table. He said, "Bacon and beans, boys." He said, "That's your breakfast this morning." And we weren't there long before they shipped us off down to the station and got on a train and Quite a number of people watching at the station crying their eyes out.
And the new BEF is on the way. Down from 100 points in Britain, down to the coast and across to France.
Steady stream of British troops continues. This is just a daily event at many a French port. Thousands of Tommies, all willing and ready to do all over again the job we thought their fathers had settled once and for all in 1918.
My brother and I used to go up on the deck each night and say goodbye to England. But one morning we got up and somebody had taken England away, and it was just water, and the engine was running and we were on our way, which is quite a sinking feeling.
They were soon to discover that their training had done little to prepare them in confronting the might of the German forces.
We shall never stop fighting until France stands safe again in all her grandeur. We know that day will surely come. These boys will help to bring it nearer, and it may be a lot nearer than many of us think.
From the very start of war in Europe and through the 5 years that followed, the inexperienced and impressionable would be trained to fight on various battlefronts in Western Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean.
We had a Scotsman who was with us who kept calling out, we're all doomed, because there was 13 of us, there were 13 ships in the convoy, and we left at 1300 hours.
In the early months of the war, a Franco-British force was dispatched to disrupt the German occupation of Norway.
We built defences at Lillehammer, held the Germans up for so long, and the Norwegians came and took over our positions while we built some more positions.
But after several weeks of bitter fighting, the Allies were forced to withdraw in the face of harsh opposition from the German invaders. Returning to Britain, they were sent to join troops already standing guard on the borders of France, facing another German invasion threat.
I was dispatched to France with the 51st Island Division, and we were employed along the Belgian frontier until we were sent down to, of all places, the Maginot Line. The Germans seemed to have a superior race at that time because they seemed to have everything that we didn't have.
I knew a fair bit about soldiering, but I don't know about warfare. I mean, we'd had training, but a lot of what they taught you in peacetime didn't work out when you got into action.
We were ignorant. We didn't know really much about what was going on. We knew the Germans were there. We didn't know how many there was.
I was under the impression that the British Army, we were 600,000 strong. And I thought that was a lot of men. I thought that was going to be very good. It wasn't till later we eventually found out that Germany was about 3 million strong.
Not only were the Allied forces outnumbered, but many divisions were sent into battle, lacking important equipment and ammunitions.
It hadn't been issued with a ground sheet or ammunition or even iron rations, which you got in those days. And the rifle was an old carbide from the Boer War.
After a while, we got notice to be sent up to the front. All I got was a rifle and 5 rounds of ammunition, all of us. Private, that's all. And it threatened with no ammunition. They gave me 2 magazines for a brain gun, 500 a minute to start the battle. Useless.
The amount of ammunition we had was 50 rounds a man. We had an anti-tank rifle, which I think we only had about 4 rounds for. We had a Piat gun with a couple of shells.
Piat gun was just a waste of time. You might as well have thrown snowballs at tanks.
This lack of experience and weaponry led to the near annihilation of the British Expeditionary Force. Overwhelmed by the Blitzkrieg tactics adopted as the Nazi armoured columns thrust into France, they were slowly but surely pushed back to the coast where they had not long before disembarked.
They didn't have a clue that the Germans were even there until they appeared. Nobody said the Germans were only 5 miles away, or we've got to get ready. Nobody said anything at all about that. The first sign I saw of the Germans were with the tanks coming across the hill, and then the firing.
We was ordered to make a bayonet charge. I wasn't worried about getting shot, but I hated the thought of a big long steel bayonet going through.
It was a terrifying thing, but the alternative seemed to be deaths. So, your general's telling you what to do and you've got to do it. And even if you'd have said no, what would you have done? We were completely and utterly outnumbered. Nobody expected it to be such a disaster as what it was.
I never worried once. I never thought for a moment that I was going to die. But I was scared that I was going to go home without an arm or a leg. I think I'd rather have been shot, dead.
All the bloody French, they outnumbered us by about 100 to 1, I think. So they were just giving themselves up with no fighter engine, got the full equipment.
And gradually the party broke up into little groups, and we finished up, I think we finished up with about half a dozen of us, and walking back and making little stands every time where we could, We
were told by an officer, it is every man for himself. And we had to find our own way to the coast and find our own way out of the situation.
Sadie said, "Oh, that you're no use to me." He said, "You might as well bugger off." I said, "Where to?" "Anywhere," he said, "down into Dunkirk." "Well, where am I going to go?" I said, "Anywhere, that's up to you where you land up."
When we suddenly realised what was happening, the officer was the first one to leave us. He just ran away and said, "This isn't right, we're not trained for this, every man for himself," and he went.
In the confusion, over 50,000 did not escape. These early captives were amongst the first to swell the growing numbers of prisoners of war.
And I was so scared, I turned round on my stomach, I took my steel helmet off, thinking that this would be a quick way. Then the firing stopped for a while. In the end, there was only 5 of us who were able to surrender. We got up and we gave ourselves up.
I went into a house on the front of this village, and when we came out, there were dead and wounded lying everywhere. We were surrounded. There was just the sea and the Germans, and the French had all surrendered, left us high and dry. It was really a shock, which we never recovered from for a long time.
Did a retreat right through Belgium to Dunkirk. Got to Dunkirk and go and get myself wounded.
Those lucky enough to stand were evacuated on the beaches of Dunkirk. The unlucky, the seriously wounded and dead, were left behind.
There we stayed till the Germans came and having progress about and turn us over, see if we had any arms concealed underneath us. And that was it.
As the British retreated back to England, they left behind enough equipment to supply 8 divisions. They would need months to resupply. In June 1940, Italy joined forces with Nazi Germany as fighting began in North Africa.
And then the rumour was that we were going to Greenland, of all places. And of course that was wrong. We were going the other way to Algeria.
Then as it became imminent that Italy was going to enter the war, we moved up to the wire between Libya and Egypt.
Despite the experience gained in the earlier campaigns, British troops were still forced to fight in conditions they hadn't trained for.
We went to a place called Taborba, 20 odd miles south of Tunis. And I remember the lorry driver saying, "I'm very sorry for you lads where you're going," called Hellfire Pass. When we got there, we were supposed to relieve the Northamptonshires who'd had a bad time. And all we could see were bodies in the olive woods.
Danger did not only lie with the forces fighting in and around Axis-held territories. The thousands of airmen who took to the skies every night for bombing raids were an increasing target for German fighters and anti-aircraft fire.
You arrive at the squadron, and you're still not aware that you're about to face death. You get briefed, and as you were kitting yourself out, you would say to your best friend, if you don't make it back, can I have your eggs and bacon? It was never going to be you. And off you fly.
I was an instructor. They decided to do the 1,000 bomber raids. And they sent me on the first 3, and I was shot down on the 3rd one. Only 2 crews survived that night, and that was an average. It was 100 people every night. And they talk about a war today, 100 airmen every night.
Across all battlefronts, losses mounted as the war became more ruthless.
I said to the guys, I said, "Stay where you are." I said, "They're not taking prisoners, they're shooting every man that can get." I said, "Stay where you are."
As the fighting intensified, the fate of thousands of Allied troops hung in the balance.
And then this big guy came up and he called out, "Gentlemen, please put your hands up, come out, for you the war is over."
The German tide of conquest stretches across the map. At its margins, at different times and at different locations, fighting men are falling into the hands of the enemy. In North Africa, troops are locked in battle.
Well, we went into the war, but we had 680 men. And in 5 days, there was only 190 of us left.
We decided to start walking, came across the river, and that all green slime on top. We decided, although it's stupid, but we had decided to only go by night. But then we thought, well, no point, we're all clear. And we stripped off and waded across the river, started getting dressed, and all of a sudden the place came alive with Germans, all camouflaged, all round us, and watching us for hours.
We could see this Panzer and motorbike and sidecar and all these other Jerrys and that. So, of course, I had no option but to put the white flag up.
We fought our way up to Benghazi, and the sergeant major said to me, "Go up the road and see what's happening, Ron." Oh, corporal, like, you know. I went up the road, and all of a sudden, there was a tank coming down the road, and a Jerry standing up in the front, and in perfect English, he says, "Come on, boys," he said, "for you, the war's over. Drop your guns." And
he said, he said, "The Englander." The Englander, he said, what are you doing?" I could have told him, I'd nearly shitting myself.
By 1943, the Allies had succeeded in North Africa. They soon began a slow offensive into the Italian region, which lasted up until 1945. Recruits fresh out of training were on their way for their first taste of the war, alongside already battle-hardened men.
The day came when the training was finished. We was just loaded in lorries and we were given sandwiches and taken to the ship and picked up a convoy for Malta.
In the Mediterranean, naval units were under constant pressure as each side strove to supply its own forces and intercept the convoys of their enemy.
We travelled to Malta, and on the way there was aircraft about, there were submarines shadowing us. Shells was coming in. I think we had about 12 hits, and I was dazed and crawled. It was all smoke, black smoke. All I could do was crawl towards the light, which I could see in the distance. I crawled to the light and I heard a shipmate screaming out, and I crawled to him. I tried to pull him out, but my strength had gone. I couldn't do anything. And those chaps that wasn't too bad, we hung around the sides on the side ropes. And we hung on there for 9 hours. We were all together, but when they picked us up, it was 10 hours.
As the Allies landed in Italy, the Italians were quick to surrender. But the German reaction was vigorous and determined.
They shipped us out onto landing ships. I landed at Salerno. There was some opposition, but we managed that. And then we gradually fought our way north, mountain after mountain, horrific fighting, and conditions and all that. The battalion had to attack Monte Camino. The commander officer said, there's only a couple of German OPs up there, he said. Saturday night job, 8 hours to get up there. And we had a terrific battle for 3 days up there. It is horrendous.
We were told that infantry were coming through us during the night and would relieve us, but they never came. And the following morning, about 6 o'clock, we heard tanks, and we thought, hello, they're coming to relieve us. And of course, they came over the hill, and the German cross was on the side of the tanks, and we thought, this is it.
Fighting at Anzio was very bitter. We had an American commander who had already said, I understand, it couldn't be done. Well, if you have a commander who doesn't think it could be done, he's not the commander you need. Hitler already said that they were to lance the Apsis south of Rome, which was us, and they sent everything against us to get rid of it. It was a very traumatic experience, something we'd never even thought of. I mean, I thought about being killed. I thought about being badly wounded, perhaps even crippled for life. But I never thought about being taken prisoner. That happened to other people.
The mounting bomber offensives against German industrial centers did not come without sacrifice. Many air crews were lost over occupied territory.
A German night fighter had come underneath us. And in those days, they were no longer attacking the rear gunner. They were underneath where there were no gun position, just raised their guns and fired. And I was sitting about 3 feet away from my pilot on his right, and he got killed instantly.
Bailing out of a stricken aircraft was no guarantee of survival.
They always warned you when you bailed out, cross your legs, because the trees are high and dangerous. Cover your eyes to protect yourself. So I did this, and nothing happened at all. It all went very, very quiet. And I peeped through my fingers to see where I was, and I was hung up in a tree.
But there I am in a strange field, in a strange country, not quite knowing what to do.
My trouble was I was too keen. When it started to get light, I know it was very early in the morning, you should find somewhere to get down for the day, to keep out of sight.
I went to two farmers in Normandy asking for help, and they wouldn't know, which is reasonable. They face the death penalty if they helped escapees. And the third one said, I'll help you, and I said, fine. And he took me to a little village, and there was a street, a road. And he said, the 4th house on the left, they will help you. So I went there and I knocked, and out came a German soldier. And I said in my best German, sorry, wrong address, and walked back, and he said, come, and that was it.
And before very long, I suppose only 10 minutes or less, pretty well the whole of the German army was there.
So 2 guys shouted at me, I said, hi. I said, hi, gute Nacht, grüß Gott, and started to walk on. Next thing I know, there's 2 pistols pointing at me.
My good morning must have been too convincing, because the next thing I heard, halt. I started to run, then as a shot, I stopped immediately, turned round and walked back towards this chap. And he was only a little chap, bless him, and he had this Luger pointed at me, and he had his bicycle behind him. And as I walked to him, he kind of backed up and fell over his bicycle and landed on the ground. All these other chaps started to laugh. They thought it was very funny.
And that was the end of us. A lot of shouting, guns in your stomach, in the hock, and all the rest of that. And that was my start as a POW.
From the start of the fighting in early 1940 and throughout the war, over 300,000 soldiers, seamen and airmen were taken prisoner by the Axis armies. Little did they know, their war was far from over. Capture in battle was often unavoidable. After hours or even days of intense action ending in surrender, they were thankful to be alive. But no matter where and when they were captured, they faced a further torment, a long, hard journey to prisoner of war camps scattered across Eastern Europe.
As we were marching through out of the town, French women came out and were putting out buckets of water for us. And as they did it, the Germans kicked them over, so we couldn't have them.
And as we went through the little village, the civilians were standing on the other side, and as we marched down through them to the station, they started spitting at us, you know. Pooh, pooh.
And then they said, right, oh, you're moving out. Where the hell are we going to now? So they took us down to the railway station, put us in cattle trucks. And there were about 70 to a cattle truck. You couldn't sit down.
We had a corporal that was with us, and he was the first one to get on, and he counted us as we got in. And he counted 57 in our truck. Some had more, I think.
We put 40 of us in there, and that was a bit crowded, you know. But knowing the Germans, they decided that another 20 wouldn't hurt. So they put another 20 of us in there, and you were in a position that you couldn't move.
The doors were shut, and bars put in place, and that was it.
Horrible cattle trucks without any covering on the floor, had the rivets sticking up, and that didn't matter where you put yourself, sat down, lied down, these rivets dug in, and it's no good saying, well, sit on a coat or whatever, because it was so cold that you had to stay fully dressed.
We were on that train for the whole of the day, and I remember seeing the German slogan on the side of the trains. Die Raden müssen rollen für den Sieg. The wheels must roll for victory.
I noticed on the side of the wall there was all Jewish, I didn't know what they were like, but Jewish messages and sort of thing. They must have known where they were going. I didn't know at the time what these were for, but these cattle trucks were the same cattle trucks that the Jewish people were pushed into to go along to what was unknown then, these concentration camps.
As the POWs captured across Europe started their cramped journeys to unknown destinations, many would experience a Nazi disregard of the Geneva Convention.
It took roughly 2 weeks because they stopped overnight in different sidings. They let us out for water once a day.
and we were getting a bit hungry. There was no food. Eventually we were given something, which was, I think it was a loaf of bread between about 5 or 6 men, and a lump of little cube of margarine. And that was it. We were told that was it for 24 hours. We weren't getting any more.
We had a few bits of black bread and bits of meat and that sort of thing given to us. And then you had a bowl of this, well, we called it stodge, which was a sort of a cabbage stew sort of thing.
He gave us half a loaf to last us all the way. And somebody pinched mine.
We were saved by a thunderstorm, a terrific thunderstorm. It rained heavy, and we caught some drips in the tin that dripped through the roof, you know, and water. We got water like that.
This journey went on across country, with the train travelling at very slow speed. One stopped dead for an air raid.
We were mostly on the rail at night time, and then they used to put us on the siding during the daytime and move us again at night time. So because there were so many trains getting bombed and all that sort of thing, that I suppose to keep us safe to a certain extent.
Allied air forces were now striking deep into Europe as they sought to destroy supply routes, truck convoys, and trains. Unwittingly, they sometimes targeted their own servicemen. The POWs could only hope and pray that they would survive the perilous journey.
There's a village up on in France, there was a village up on the hill, and the Red Cross were there, and they insisted that we had POW painted on top of the carriage, the wagons, because the train in front had been strafed. So the Jerry said, well, if you want it, you do it.
For some, transit to the camps was a more leisurely affair.
The train was very crowded, and at one stage a German major opened the door, and these 4 soldiers got out. And he said, they said, you can't sit down, it's reserved for prisoners of war. And he said, what a bloody war this is. You know, terror fleegers out sitting in comfort, and decent German officers are being treated like swine. And I said, I couldn't agree with you more, why don't you join it? So in the end, we compromised. And I had quite a nice time, we enjoyed it.
Most prisoners didn't have the luxury of traveling in the carriages. Those in the overcrowded cattle trucks were treated like animals.
We stayed in these trucks for 3 days and 2 nights. Only stopped twice to answer the call of nature.
I didn't go to the toilet there in the trucks. And chaps was doing the business in Red Cross parcel boxes and throwing them out the little slit in the cattle trucks.
Well, you had to make sure you took a tin with you, you know, something, and so you could urinate in it.
The bloke, whoever was up in the corner or whatever, used to try and get up to the top where there was a hole in the top of the truck sort of thing, and tip it outside.
And any sort of bowel movements, they had to be controlled until you were allowed out.
We had a bucket inside the cattle truck. I don't have to tell you what that was for. And there were 60 men in there, so you can imagine what this bucket was like.
Gradually, as this bucket filled and often overflowed, everybody sort of shuffled down that way, away from it, because nobody wanted to live that end.
Well, it was awful. It was absolutely filled to capacity, and you couldn't move or anything. Of course, the horrible smells that were coming from the thing, it was terrible.
Every morning we were stopped out in the country, and some able-bodied blokes pulled out and dug a hole and emptied the bin and back in, and away we went.
As prisoners were transported, many felt duty-bound to escape.
We hadn't been on a day, we'd done about 3/4 of the day, and the Germans found out that the Australians had dug a hole in the bottom of this cattle truck.
there was a bit of commotion at the back, next truck to us, and apparently there were some Australians in it. And they'd managed to get a chopper, an axe, and they was chopped through the floorboards and escaped, some of them. But the Germans came up and they just riddled the truck with machine gun after that. They just sprayed the truck with machine guns.
One American was shot trying to escape. They put in the sidings at night and he tried it, and we thought, well, this is useless trying to escape here.
The interpreter came round one day and said, anybody here with engineering experience? And we said, why? He said, we want help up in the car factories up in Milan. I said, okay, like so a couple of hundred put our names up, our hands up, of course. And we put us on a train and we travelled overnight, pulled up on the station in the morning.
And the Italian guards got off and I could hear German voices. And I thought, that's funny. We should be getting off here and going to the plains of Po to work.
And all of a sudden, we heard roast. Someone said, hey, that's German.
And to my horror, what happened? The Jerrys chased the Italian guards off the train. They tore down the camouflage. And I saw on the station the name of the station. It was Brenner. We were at the Brenner Pass, which is at the base of Austria. So instead of getting off the train, the Italians sold us a dummy. They got off, the Jerrys got on, and away we went through Austria.
We stopped one morning, very early, misty, and somebody called out in German to two bowwomen walking along the footplate, a track farther over, but they didn't respond. So somebody called out in French and didn't respond. Somebody called out in something else, and eventually they got an answer, and it was in Polish. And that's when we knew we were in Poland.
And when we eventually stopped, it was a station called Lambsdorff. In Lambsdorff, it was quite near a great big prisoner of war camp called Stalag 8B.
These stalags were the German prisoner of war camps. Over 150 of them stretched out along the Nazi-occupied territories in the east.
We got off the train and we was marching down the road to our camp, and we marched past barbed wire fencing and fellas in pyjamas. And I said to one of the guards, who are they? Juden, he said. I said, Juden. Jews, he said. Like as though we should have known. I mean, we didn't know they were persecuting the Jews. I had no idea.
After days of marching and travelling on trains, the POWs set foot in their new home, Stalag camps along the German and Polish border. In these cramped, crowded living conditions, they were expected to sit out the rest of the war.
And eventually we finished up in Poland, quite late at night. And we got out and we marched past a cemetery into a prison camp.
And of course we'll say, what are we put here for? What's them calling through the wire to the others, what's all this about? Nobody knew.
There must be several hundred of us, quite a large bunch. They'd been collecting them from all over the Italian front, all nationalities, British, Indian, American, all kinds.
Many of them were public school boys. So to them, a prisoner of war camp must have been rather similar. You know, the food was lousy, there were no women, you rode home once a fortnight, you did as the headmaster did. So it must have been not much change.
Having survived the torment of capture, they were now to sit out the rest of the war behind wire. The prisoners adjusted to camp life as best they could. They waited patiently, confident of eventual liberation by Allied forces that were striking fresh offences. But they were to face many hardships and ordeals that would challenge their hopes of ever regaining their freedom.